So many times in my language learning, I have felt stuck, overwhelmed, and basically wondering why my language learning has gotten more frustrating than fun and fulfilling. Instead of looking at more surface level reasons of why we struggle in our languages, I want to offer up different reasons that you probably haven't thought much about. The first thing I've noticed is that we can confuse confidence with self-esteem, and this held me back in my own language learning so much because I wondered why I would feel so confident at one point after receiving a compliment or finishing a streak, and then the very next day I would be right back to feeling really down and really discouraged about my language learning, wondering where the confidence went. So let me give you another example of this. Let's just say that you may have found yourself in a situation where you say to yourself, I learned language A so well. Why am I struggling so much to speak in language B? I just wish I could go back to feeling confident like I did in language A. So this has happened to me multiple times, especially because I have been learning multiple languages. And I have found that this is where the mix-up between confidence and self-esteem lies. What could be going on is that we think we have grown so much based on what has happened in the past, which indeed we have, but then we feel like we are regressing in the present, right? We're getting discouraged again. We're feeling exactly how we didn't want to feel in the past, and we wonder where that confidence from the past went. If I felt confident before with this language in whatever context, why can't I replicate it in this next language? But confidence actually goes a lot deeper than that, and it's self-esteem, not confidence, that was shaped via learning language A in our example, most likely. True confidence is steady. It's long-term. Meanwhile, self-esteem can waver at any point in our learning. As the lovely Brené Brown says, we think self-esteem, but confidence that lasts in our languages, in ourselves, is a much more deeply felt internal experience. If we do feel more deeply connected to ourselves, then that confidence allows more enjoyment in our language learning to come through. While confidence can accompany a boost in self-esteem like this, it isn't always guaranteed to go that way, right? We know that we are intelligent because of this and this that we have accomplished in our past. We are thinking it in our head, but at the same time, we may not be feeling that true deep confidence in our language learning abilities and ourselves. And when we misidentify that problem, then we also misidentify the solution. Hence, we tend to feel confused whenever we are mixing up confidence and self-esteem. We think doing this kind of thing, buying this kind of planner, immersing in this kind of language learning strategy will automatically give us this lasting confidence that we want, when actually that one specific thing might just be boosting our self-esteem temporarily. This leads us then to wondering why we feel like we are quote unquote regressing time and time again, even after we have hit all of these milestones that deserve to be celebrated in our language learning. Now again, we need self-esteem. We need external validation, especially from other speakers who are giving us feedback and comments so that we can naturally improve. However, there's sometimes a thin line, especially for ambitious language learners who tend to be hard on themselves, that rely too heavily on factors that give them self-esteem on their learning, but do not help them increase their confidence, which is a lot more a marker of long-term success, joy, and fulfillment in the language learning process long-term. So how do you escape the cycle and actually build true confidence? It is easier said than done, especially if you are learning solo, especially if you feel like you're lacking guidance, and I love to help you nurture your true, authentic confidence in any part of your language learning journey. And I especially like to do this with my private coaching membership, the Mindful Multilinguals Collective Pro, accelerating your progress 5 times faster than you would be able to in your language alone. Definitely join the waitlist in the comments below because I'm opening doors again this summer. Another reason why we might be struggling or aren't where we want to be, we are choosing resistance over acceptance. What's an example of choosing resistance instead of accepting and working with the parts of ourselves that frustrate us in our learning? Let's take perfectionism, for example. I'm sure we've all been there where we feel like we want everything to be perfect in our language learning. We want something to be done a certain way. And we wish that we could just make perfectionism, the uncomfortable feelings in my language learning, just go away so I could be successful. There is a hint of resistance when we tell ourselves that, right? Because we're not accepting what is right in front of us. Trying to resist who you are authentically as a person learning your language, not wanting to fully admit to yourself what might be going on for you mentally when learning your language, or hyperfixating on what you could have done better or shouldn't have done in the past. Whatever that means for you, resistance feels exhausting, and that resistance will keep on making language learning a struggle no matter how great the milestones are that you achieve in your language learning. So we all must learn how to incorporate more acceptance and therefore more peace and joy into your learning process, which again, I love to work with language learners on inside the Mindful Multilinguals Collective. Another reason you've probably struggled with your languages before is thinking that changing is the only logical and reasonable option when feeling frustrated. I see this trend where we tend to think about, in our very productive, sort of capitalist-driven society, that staying the same for a little bit, aka taking no action in our language learning when we are feeling this resistance for us come up, or we are feeling uninspired, unmotivated. Basically, we're feeling any feeling that we don't want to feel in our learning, right? When language learning starts to feel harder, our very first thought is to automatically take action and change something radically, right? Because we think that's what's going to get us back to feeling confident. We say to ourselves, action is the enemy of progress. And I want to offer the opposite perspective. What if actually choosing the opposite, aka staying the same for a little bit and not taking action, might be what is best for you to do in your learning? Hear me out. I think language learning videos on YouTube, including some of mine, give very detailed steps about logistical factors in our language learning, right? How to create a plan, how to apply this and this method, etc. Doing the same thing in our language learning instead of changing things is actually the most productive step forward sometimes. And when we feel that resistance to doing something that we know technically could be good for our progress, but we're resisting it and falling back off of it, our actions might be telling us that we value, actually more than we thought, sameness instead of change. Taking action immediately in our language learning, while sometimes useful, is not always the healthiest choice for ending our frustration and getting unstuck in our learning. We can start to think about sameness as the complement to change. It's kind of like the concept of yin and yang. One cannot survive and exist without the other. Pausing and reflecting, introducing a little bit more patience inside our language learning, which then allows us more to actually reflect on what we need from ourselves, what we need to connect to in order to get unstuck in our learning, instead of automatically taking action, changing around different things in our learning, or just continuing day after day to grind away at our goals without allowing ourselves some sameness to come in, can make us feeling stuck and just going down a same path that we actually don't want to go on. Constant change can sometimes just feel very overwhelming for us, especially if we've been doing it for a while and we notice that our progress is not seeming to move forward. So taking a pause in sameness sometimes, so you can more deeply reflect on your next step, on how to get unstuck in your learning. When you do that, you might find that you don't need to change up your language learning as much as you thought in order to reach goals. You are your best teacher. You know what is best for yourself, and you can only access that to get unstuck in your learning if you actually allow pause, sameness, reflection to come through. Another reason we might be struggling with our languages is that we are going way out of our comfort zone. I always want us to think about how we can expand our comfort zone instead of just jumping way out of it. And I have good reasons for that. For example, when I was learning German, I was still very shy. However, I started to gradually think about how to engage with the language because I did want to speak it, even though I was painfully shy. So eventually I started thinking about it and I started to simply just write tandem partner. Writing then turned into sending a voice note every once in a while. That turned into talking on the phone with someone, but not having to see their face. And this translated to then being able to study abroad in the country. So you could see my gradual progression. I think if I had gone from not speaking to anyone to automatically going abroad, that would have made me retreat back into my comfort zone a lot more and feel like I just made a wrong decision. But I chose to meet myself where I was. And what this gradual progression of expanding our edges of our comfort zone looks like is going to be different for everyone. But no, there are certain boundaries that we need to start setting for ourselves in order to really investigate what is going to push us gradually out of our comfort zone, meeting ourselves where we are with care, but still challenging ourselves just enough so that we do make progress, right? Plus, there's no right answer to setting a boundary in our language learning because it's going to be different for all of us. This leads me to my next point, which is I think as high achievers, when we are learning languages, we always want to be told or given a signal about what to do next in our learning. And sometimes textbooks are set up for this, right? They tell us what kind of progression we need to follow in order to learn the correct grammar, learn the necessary vocabulary in this logical sequence according to what they think is best for us. But with boundaries, and as with life, we have to accept that sometimes there is no right or wrong answer. And we have to accept that sometimes instant clarity will not come in order to find that next right answer for ourselves. Sometimes it's going to take time, and sometimes we have to live in the gray. Plus, the right answer that you think is good for your language learning that you're going to choose in order to progress further might not always work for you, might not always be the right answer in the future. Because again, you and your language are ever evolving, and your needs for what you need to get out of the language too are going to change. Again, we can put up our resistance to living in a gray area where we are not getting that clarity that we instantly want in order to solve the problem. Again, this is where patience and allowing ourselves pause, right? Allowing ourselves to stay the same for a little bit, to really reflect on this question is really valuable. I'd love to know in the comments what resonated with you most in this video, for why you have also personally struggled in your languages. You are definitely not alone in this either, and we'll catch each other in another video very soon.